Have you ever wondered what you would do if you had to choose between earthly love and your faith? This is the story of Juliana, a 19-year-old girl who lived over 1700 years ago. Yet her dilemma is as current as a WhatsApp notification on your phone. She wasn't a superhero. She was just a young woman in love with Christ and willing to do anything for him. Her story speaks not only of martyrdom, but also of a courage born from the purest, most sincere heart. Chapter 1. The Early Years. In the dusty streets of Nicomedia, where the scent of spices mingled with the incense of pagan temples, a little girl with curious eyes grew up in a noble family. Juliana, born in a house adorned in every corner with statues of false gods, felt from an early age that something was different in her heart. While her father, Africano, devoted himself to pagan rituals, and her mother watched silently, the little girl found comfort in the stories whispered by her Christian nurse. Afternoons in the courtyard of her home turned into sacred moments when, hidden behind marble columns, she listened intently to the teachings about a different God, a God of love who had given his own son for humanity. These secret stories planted in her heart a seed that no amount of family wealth could ever uproot. As she grew, Juliana stood out not only for her exceptional beauty, but also for a wisdom beyond her years. The servants murmured about how the young girl refused to participate in the pagan festivities, preferring to retreat to her room where, in secret, she prayed to the God of the Christians. Her father, proud of his social standing, attributed this reserved behavior to the modesty expected of a noble young lady. Juliana's adolescence unfolded between two worlds: the external world, full of luxury and privileges typical of her social class, and an inner world where her faith grew stronger each day. In the mornings, she dutifully fulfilled her obligations as the daughter of a noble, but at night, her heart soared freely in prayers to the true God. However, the peace of these formative years was about to be shattered. As Juliana blossomed into a beautiful 18-year-old, her father began weaving plans for her future, plans that would test every fiber of her faith and determine the course of her short but meaningful life. No one could have foreseen that the little girl who had grown up among marble columns and pagan statues would become one of the most powerful testimonies of loyalty to Christ. Chapter 2. The Promise of Marriage. At that time, marriage promises were more than mere agreements. They were unbreakable contracts sealing the fate of young women. One autumn afternoon, while the sun gilded the gardens of the family villa, Africano summoned his daughter Juliana to his presence. The young girl's heart pounded, for she well understood the significance of these formal convocations. With a smile that mixed paternal pride and political satisfaction, Africano announced that he had found the perfect match for his daughter, Evilasio, the young and promising prefect of Nicomedia. Her father's words fell like stones into the still pond of her soul. "I have given my word, my daughter. You will be the wife of the most powerful man in the city." Juliana remained silent while her mind desperately searched for an escape that would compromise neither her faith nor her filial obedience. The following days were a whirlwind of preparations and visits. The household matrons came and went with fabrics, jewels, and plans for the grand event. Amidst all the bustle, Juliana sought refuge in her room, where tears mingled with increasingly fervent prayers. "Lord," she pleaded, "grant me the wisdom to honor you without dishonoring my family." It was during one of these nights of prayer that Juliana conceived an idea that would change the course of her story. She would not directly reject the marriage. That would have been an unforgivable affront to her father and the customs of the time. Instead, she would impose one condition. She would marry Evilasio only if he converted to Christianity. It was a risky move, but in her heart, she knew it was the only possible path. News of her condition spread like wildfire through the villa. The servants whispered in the corridors. The visits grew tense, and the once festive atmosphere turned heavy like the air before a storm. Juliana knew she had set something in motion that could not be stopped, yet in her heart she felt a peace that only the certainty of doing what was right before God could bring. Chapter 3. Evilazio, the Suitor. In the power circles of Nicomedia, Evilazio was considered the most coveted bachelor, not only for his post as prefect, but also for his distinguished bearing and political skill. When he walked through the streets of the city, clad in his toga edged with purple, young patrician women would sigh at his every step. Yet his eyes were fixed on only one, the beautiful and mysterious Juliana. At first, Juliana's imposed condition seemed like a youthful eccentricity, something he could handle with his usual political savvy. After all, what was a small religious concession compared to the possibility of having as his wife the most beautiful woman in Nicomedia? But as the days passed, Juliana's firmness began to irritate him. In his years as prefect, no one had ever dared set conditions for him. During formal visits to Africano's house, Evilazio tried to dazzle Juliana with tales of his power and promises of wealth. He described the life they could have together, a villa larger than her father's, servants at her disposal, jewels from faraway lands. "You could be the most envied woman in all of Nicomedia," he told her, studying her serene face for any sign of doubt. What baffled Evilazio most was the peace that radiated from the young woman. Despite the pressure from her father, the gossip of society, and his own veiled threats, Juliana maintained a serenity that both fascinated and enraged him. How could a simple girl so openly defy his authority? The idea that someone might prefer a crucified God to him began to obsess him. At night, as he strolled through his luxurious residence, Evilazio felt his wounded pride slowly transform into something darker. If Juliana did not yield voluntarily, he would have to show her that in Nicomedia, the power of the prefect was second only to that of the emperor. The gentle marriage proposal was turning into a test of wills with consequences no one could have imagined. Chapter 4. The Unyielding Decision. Life in Africano's household had become a silent battlefield. Juliana spent her days amid disapproving glances and sighs of disappointment. One morning, while she was embroidering in the atrium as befitting a young lady of her status, her mother approached with soft yet determined steps. It was the first time they had spoken alone since the announcement of her marriage condition. "My daughter," her mother whispered as she sat beside her, "why do you insist on complicating what could be so simple?" Her eyes, weary from secretly crying, searched for understanding. "Your father is furious, Evilazio is growing impatient, and you remain as steadfast as a marble statue." Juliana put aside her embroidery and for the first time dared to share with her mother the fire burning in her heart. "Mother, how can I share my life with someone who does not share my faith? How can I raise my children among stone gods when I know the living God?" The afternoons became moments of trial when Evilazio visited the house. His persuasive attempts grew ever more intense. One day, exasperated by her constant refusal, he dropped his mask of courtesy. "Do you know what happens to the Christians who defy the empire?" he asked with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Juliana, with a calm that could only come from heaven, replied, "And do you know what happens to those who, knowing the truth, reject it?" The tension reached its peak during a family dinner. Africano, tired of his daughter's rebellion, struck the table with such force that the wine glasses trembled. "You will marry Evilazio. It is an order, or you will face the consequences." The ensuing silence was deafening. Juliana, in a soft but firm voice, pronounced the words that would seal her fate. "Father, you may deliver my body to martyrdom, but my soul belongs to Christ." Chapter 5. Father Africano. "Africano!" The cries of the slaves echoed through the corridors as the Roman noble stormed towards his private quarters. His heavy steps made the marble tremble beneath his feet, and the echo of his wrath bounced off the walls, decorated with frescoes of gods who no longer brought him comfort. Juliana's disobedience had made her the laughingstock of Nicomedia, something his pride could not endure. That night, as wine coursed down his throat in an attempt to drown his shame, he recalled little Juliana running through the gardens, obedient and sweet. Where had that little girl gone? His thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a messenger from Evilazio. "My Lord Prefect demands a definitive answer about the marriage." Africano hurled his cup against the wall, the red wine staining the frescoes like a dark omen. The following morning, still clouded by the effects of the wine, Africano summoned his daughter to the tablinum, the office where he handled important affairs. Juliana entered with a determined step, her serene face contrasting with the storm looming ahead. "I am giving you one last chance," her father growled. "Marry Evilazio, or you will be brought before the tribunal." His words fell like a death sentence in the silent room. The oldest servants in the house had never seen their master so out of control. Some, secretly Christians, prayed silently for the young girl as they went about their tasks. Others, fearful of Africano's wrath, dared not even look at Juliana. The entire house held its breath, waiting for the outcome of this battle between earthly power and heavenly faith. At dusk, as shadows lengthened in the atrium, Africano made his final decision. If his daughter did not yield voluntarily, the tribunal would force her to comply. With trembling hands fueled by rage, he wrote the letter that he would deliver to his own daughter via Prefect Evilazio, not as a future wife, but as an accused. "May the gods forgive me," he murmured as he sealed the parchment with his ring, knowing deep in his heart that he was sending his only daughter toward a terrible fate. Chapter 6. The Trial. The courtroom was packed that morning. It was not every day that the daughter of one of Nicomedia's most influential nobles was on trial. The murmuring of the crowd ceased when Evilazio took his place on the podium, his prefect's toga shimmering in the light, streaming through the tall windows. Juliana was led to the center of the room, her footsteps echoing in the near-funereal silence. "Juliana, daughter of Africano," Evilazio's voice reverberated against the marble walls. "You are accused of defying paternal authority and of showing contempt for the gods of the empire." His eyes, which once looked at her with desire, now shone with a mixture of anger and humiliation. "However," he continued, softening his tone, "there is still time to redeem yourself. Accept the marriage, offer incense to the gods, and all will be forgiven." In the front row, Africano watched with a tense face, waiting for his daughter to finally capitulate under public pressure. Beside him, his wife hid her tears behind a veil, unable to look directly at her daughter. Among the crowd, a few hidden Christians prayed silently, bolstered by the testimony of this young girl who remained serene in the face of the empire's power. Then Juliana spoke, her clear and firm voice filling every corner of the room. "Noble Evilazio, my heart already has a master. My love belongs to Christ, and no threat can change that. If I must choose between earthly life and fidelity to my faith, I choose fidelity." A murmur of astonishment rippled through the courtroom. No one had expected such a brave declaration from a girl barely 19. Evilazio's response was immediate and brutal. His face, twisted with rage, pronounced the sentence, "Take her to prison. There she will learn that in Nicomedia no one defies the prefect or the gods of the empire." As the guards led her out of the courtroom, Juliana maintained a serene smile, as if she were no longer there, as if her spirit had transcended the courtroom walls to join a place beyond the reach of earthly power. Chapter 7. The Prison and the Temptation. Night fell over the Nicomedia prison like a heavy shroud. The only sounds were the constant drip of water on the damp walls and the occasional clink of chains. Alone in her cell, Juliana found solace in prayer. The cold penetrated her bones, yet her spirit burned with a fire that no dungeon could extinguish. Suddenly, a brilliant light filled the cell. Before her appeared a radiant figure with wings that seemed to be woven from golden light. "Juliana," The apparition spoke in a melodious voice. "Why do you persist in suffering? The gods of the empire are merciful. Renounce them, accept marriage with Evilasio, and you shall be free." The angel smiled, but something in that smile sent a shiver down Juliana's spine, a shiver unrelated to the chill of the prison. The young woman closed her eyes and began to pray even more fervently. "My Lord Jesus," she whispered, "grant me the wisdom to distinguish truth from falsehood." As she prayed, a certainty grew within her. A true messenger of God would never ask her to deny her faith. Opening her eyes, she confronted the apparition. "Who are you, clad in light yet preaching darkness?" The figure blazed with anger, its once beautiful features beginning to distort. "You foolish child!" the being roared, its voice now rough like stones scraping against metal. "You could have everything, wealth, power, love, and you reject it all for a crucified God." The cell filled with the stench of sulfur as the true nature of the visitor was revealed. Yet Juliana, instead of feeling fear, experienced a deep peace. If even the enemy came to tempt her, it was proof that her faith was on the right path. In the darkness that followed the disappearance of the false angel, Juliana smiled. The chains that bound her wrists no longer seemed so heavy. She had faced the tempter and emerged victorious. "Thank you, Lord," she murmured in the gloom, "for showing me that not even the Prince of Lies can separate us." Dawn would find Juliana stronger than ever, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 8. Evilasio's Proposals. The next morning, Evilasio personally descended to the dungeons. The echo of his elegant steps contrasted starkly with the filth and misery of the place. He stopped before Juliana's cell, observing with a mixture of admiration and disdain the young woman who, despite a night in prison, maintained her dignity intact. "My dear Juliana," he began in a syrupy voice, "look at where you have forced us to come, but it is not too late yet." He produced from his toga a small ivory chest. When he opened it, the gleam of jewels lit up the dark walls of the cell. "This is but a sample. As my wife, you would have the finest jewels in the empire, a villa in Rome, servants at your disposal, everything a woman could desire." Juliana listened in silence, recalling the false angel's visit that night. How many forms would temptation take? Interpreting her silence as doubt, Evilasio continued, "I would even allow you to practice your religion in private. Isn't that a reasonable compromise? Many Christians do it." His words dripped with honey, yet concealed poison. When Juliana finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "Noble Evilasio, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world if he loses his soul? Your jewels are beautiful, but my faith is a treasure far greater. Your villa in Rome might be a more luxurious prison than this one, but it would still be a prison for my conscience." Evilasio's mask of amiability shattered like delicate porcelain, his face contorted into a snarl of fury. "Then you shall know the true meaning of suffering," he bellowed, hurling the chest against the wall. The jewels scattered on the dirty floor like drops of blood and dew. "Guards, prepare the instruments of torture. We shall see if your God can save you from the pain that awaits." Chapter 9. The Torments. Dawn brought with it the metallic clatter of torture instruments being prepared. In the prison courtyard, as the first rays of the sun barely caressed the cold stones, the executioners sharpened their tools with methodical precision. Juliana was dragged from her cell, her bare feet scraping the rough ground. "Last chance!" Evilasio roared from his raised platform. "Renounce the gods or suffer the consequences!" The assembled crowd held its breath. Some averted their eyes, unable to witness what was to come. Others, secret Christians, mingled among the throng, prayed silently for the young woman who had inspired them so much. They began with the whip. Each lash tore chunks of skin, yet could not draw even a cry from her lips. Instead of cries of pain, Juliana murmured prayers. The executioners, perplexed, looked to Evilasio for further orders. The prefect, his face deformed by anger, commanded that the torments be intensified. They dragged her to a post and tied her arms above her head. Torches were brought close to her skin, and as the flames licked her flesh, Juliana seemed transfigured. Her eyes, fixed on the heavens, shone with an inner light that no suffering could extinguish. Spectators later swore they saw a soft light surrounding her, as if an invisible shield protected her. The sun was setting when Evilásio, frustrated and humiliated by his inability to break the spirit of a mere young girl, made a final decision. If he could not subdue her, he would eliminate her. "Prepare the execution block," he ordered, his voice cracking with rage. "Tomorrow at dawn, this stubborn Christian will cease to be a problem." Chapter 10. The Martyrdom. The first rays of the sun tinted the sky over Nicomedia pink as Juliana was led to the place of her execution. The silence of early morning was broken only by the birds' song and the solemn steps of the funeral procession. Unlike other condemned souls, Juliana walked with a determined stride, as if she were heading toward a long-awaited encounter. Among the gathered crowd, an elderly Christian woman leaned close enough to whisper, "Courage, little bride of Christ." The guards pushed her back, but Juliana had already heard those words affirming what her heart knew. She was not walking toward death, but toward her true husband. Evilásio arrived mounted on his white horse, his prefect's toga billowing in the morning breeze. He observed the scene with a mix of triumph and bitterness. He had won, yes, but his victory tasted of defeat. The young woman he had long desired as his wife now walked toward death by her own stubbornness. "Let this be an example," he proclaimed in a powerful voice. "This is the fate of those who defy the gods of the empire." When Juliana knelt before the execution block, she requested a moment to pray. Surprisingly, her request was granted. Her final words were a prayer not only for herself, but for everyone present, including Evilásio and her father. "Lord, forgive them, for they know not what they do, and receive my soul into your kingdom." The executioner, moved by her serenity, had to muster all his professional courage to fulfill his duty. The sword fell with a metallic whistle, and the sun, which had just fully risen above the horizon, seemed to shine with special intensity. Later, the Christians present swore they saw a white dove ascending to the sky at the exact moment of her death. Juliana's body fell softly, as if supported by invisible hands, and even in death, her face bore a smile of peace. Chapter 11. The Legacy of Saint Juliana. News of Juliana's martyrdom spread through Nicomedia like wildfire in a parched field. That very night, as guards watched over her body to prevent the Christians from claiming it, stories began circulating about strange occurrences, celestial lights above the site of her execution, inexplicable healings among those who touched the ground where her blood had fallen. A small community of Christians, risking their lives, managed to recover her body in secret. Among them was a servant from Africano's house who had been a silent witness to Juliana's faith for years. With tears in her eyes, she helped prepare the body for a dignified burial, noticing that the wounds of torture seemed transformed into marks of glory. Juliana's tomb quickly became a site of clandestine pilgrimage. Christians gathered there at dawn or in the darkness of night, quietly sharing stories of her bravery. Many pagans, impressed by her testimony, began to question their beliefs. Among them, surprisingly, was one of the guards who had witnessed her martyrdom. What was most extraordinary, however, was the transformation that took place in Africano's household. The servants noticed that their master no longer participated in the pagan rituals with the same enthusiasm. His wife, who had remained silent throughout the ordeal, began secretly visiting her daughter's tomb. The pain had created a crack in her heart through which grace could enter. Years later, when Constantine proclaimed religious freedom for Christians, Juliana's story emerged from the catacombs into the light. Her testimony became a beacon of hope and strength for generations of believers. The young woman who had chosen Christ above all had become a living example that true love is stronger than death. Chapter 12. Popular Devotion. In the narrow streets of Naples, where the scent of the sea mixes with the incense of churches, an ancient basilica houses a special treasure, the relics of Saint Juliana. After centuries in Nicomedia, the remains of the young martyr found a new home in Italy, where her cult blossomed like the bougainvillea adorning Neapolitan walls. Italian mothers began invoking Saint Juliana, especially during pregnancy. "Who better than a young woman who defended true life to protect new life?" said the midwives as they assisted expectant mothers. Her name became a blessing whispered over expectant bellies, a promise of protection for the unborn. Across the Bosphorus in Constantinople, a church was erected in her honor. Iconographers depicted her holding a martyr's palm in one hand and a book in the other, symbolizing the wisdom that allowed her to discern between the true angel and the false. Pilgrims who visited the church recounted miracles, the healing of the sick, the resolution of conflicts, and hearts finding peace. In the East, the Orthodox celebrate her memory on December 21st, when winter embraces the golden domes of their churches. In the West, Catholics remember her on February 16th as the first signs of spring begin to emerge. It is as if heaven intended her testimony to illuminate the darkest days of the year in both traditions. Perhaps the most surprising aspect of the devotion to Saint Juliana is how her story continues to resonate with today's youth. In a world where social pressures and family expectations can stifle the voice of conscience, her example shines with renewed brilliance. "If she could remain true to her convictions in the face of death," the young say, "what excuse do we have to yield to lesser pressures?" Chapter 13. Miracles and Intercession. In the alleys of Naples circulates the story of Maria Contessa, a young mother who in 1883 faced a complicated pregnancy. The doctors had lost all hope, but an elderly neighbor suggested she pray to Saint Juliana. That night, Maria dreamed of a radiant young woman who touched her belly and smiled at her. The next day, the doctors could not explain her sudden recovery. In the city's hospitals, nurses often recount the tale of the Juliana room, where seemingly hopeless cases inexplicably find healing. An unofficial but persistent tradition keeps a small image of the saint in the maternity ward, and expectant mothers claim to feel a special protective presence in that place. Mediterranean fishermen also have their stories. They say that during a terrible storm in 1962, when all seemed lost, a bright light appeared on the horizon, guiding several boats to safe harbor. The survivors swore they saw the figure of a young woman walking on the waters. Upon reaching land, they discovered that the light had appeared exactly on Saint Juliana's feast day. But not all miracles are so spectacular. Many devotees speak of small, everyday intercessions. Difficult decisions suddenly becoming clear, broken family relationships healing, young people finding the strength to remain true to their values in complex situations. It is as if the saint understood the struggles of the human heart particularly well. Popular devotion has associated Saint Juliana especially with three types of intercession: the protection of difficult pregnancies, guidance in morally challenging decisions, and the healing of diseases considered incurable. The faithful say that she understands these situations particularly well because in her own life she faced challenges that seemed insurmountable. Chapter 14. Prayer to Saint Juliana. O glorious Saint Juliana, young in heart, yet valiant with an unyielding faith, who knew how to discern between the false promises of the world and the true love of Christ. Today we turn to you, martyr of purity and truth, seeking your powerful intercession. You who in your youth faced the threats of earthly power with a heavenly serenity, teach us to keep our faith steadfast amid the storms of life. As the special protector of expectant mothers, watch over those who carry new life within them. May your mantle of love envelop them, and may your strength accompany them at every moment. Help us discern, as you did, between true light and deceiving shadows. May we recognize the voice of God amid the clamor of the world. Grant the young who struggle to uphold their values the grace of your example. May they find inspiration in your story to defend the truth with love and courage. And to all who suffer from pain and distress, grant us the comfort of your intercession. You who knew physical and emotional pain, hear our supplications and present them before the Lord. Saint Juliana, Bride of Christ and Martyr of the Faith, pray for us now and in the hour of our departure. May your testimony inspire us and your protection be with us until the day when, like you, we may behold the face of God. Amen.